Hello, everybody, and welcome again to this episode, to another episode of PTC Live. It's me again, Stevie B at PTC, and I have a very exciting guest, a friend of mine, a very intriguing and interesting person, Miss Cami Sargeant. Cami is a PTC faculty member in our Associate of Arts History program. She's one of our history teachers, and Cami is a history buff as well. And let me just say, for all the world to say, congratulations on your recent wedding, Cami, and then tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. Yeah, I just got married in March, so we're going on 6 months now. But this is my 12th year, I believe, at Piedmont Tech, and from Asheville, North Carolina originally, but it's really been a joy to be here and serve our students for over a decade now. So love being able to come alongside people and see people cultivate a greater appreciation for history.
Great, and I like history. You know, I like learning about new things. And I was sitting here and I was thinking about our conversation today, and we're going to be talking about Constitution Day. And so I was thinking, I said, there's December 25th, and there's Christmas Day, there's Christmas Eve, there's New Year's Day, there's New Year's Eve, there's the 4th of July. But September 17th has a particular significance as well. Cami, tell us about the importance of September 17th.
Well, I'm sure everybody had their Constitution Day cake today. I'm saving mine for later. But September 17th, we got to go way back to 1787. And that's what, I can't do math, but a long time ago. I teach history and not math for a reason. But beginning in May of that year, constitutional framers got together in Philadelphia. And Steve, think about how hot it is if you've ever been to Philly in the summer. Yeah. And these guys are wearing long coats, heavy pants, and they're meeting in secrecy, not discussing with the public what they're talking about. They were tasked with revising what we call our Articles of Confederation. A lot of people think we went straight to the Constitution after the American Revolution, but we kind of messed up with another document called the Articles of Confederation, where we didn't have a strong enough executive branch. We had problems with foreign policy, raising taxes. So they were tasked with revising this document, but they decided to come up with a completely new document. And that's what would become our Constitution. And these framers, these were all white property owning men, but they signed it on September 17th of 1787, and it would be ratified, approved by enough states the next year in 1788. So that's where we get the date from it.
Hey, let's go back really quickly.
Okay.
You talked about the different parts of the Constitution. Could you briefly tell everyone the role of the three branches of the Constitution?
Sure.
Legislative, judicial, and executive.
Executive branch. Yeah. Our Constitution is divided. It's nice and organized into different articles. And we have what's known as separation of powers in our government. I mentioned that they didn't have a strong executive branch under the Articles of Confederation, and that was kind of deliberate. I mean, we had just left a monarchy in England after the American Revolution. People didn't want a really strong government. So now they're saying, okay, we need an executive government, but how can we really put it in check? So under the Articles of the Confederation, under the Articles of the Constitution, we've got the legislative branch. They're the ones who make laws. That includes our Congress is what we call bicameral. It's got the United States Senate. Those guys are elected every 6 years. You have to be 35 years old to be 30 years old to be a senator. And then you've got to be 25 to run for the House of Representatives. Every state has at least one member of the House of Representatives, and every state it's based on population. Every state has 2 senators. So a state like California, tons of people live there. they have a lot of members of the House of Representatives, but they've got only 2 senators. A state like Wyoming only has 1 member in the House of Representatives, but they've got 2 senators. So they make the laws, they declare war. The executive branch is going to be the role of the President of the United States, elected every 4 years. There is now an amendment. We can talk about some of the amendments to the Constitution, but the amendment says that a president can only serve for 2 terms. So an 8-year run as president is the maximum amount of years that you can serve. And the judicial branch interprets the laws. So like whoever the president is can't sign a law. They can veto, or they can sign something into law. They can't make a law. That's the job of the legislative branch. They can sign it into law. They can veto it if they don't like it. But we've got checks and balances to make sure a president doesn't have too much power. It can go back to the Congress. The Supreme Court, our judicial branch, can judge the interpretation of a law and whether it's constitutional or not. So we have a lot of protections to make sure minority rights are represented, and that also the majority views of the country are taken into consideration as well. So it's a great balance with the separation of powers and those checks and balances to make sure one group of the government doesn't get too much power.
I think one of the things that I've always learned and I've always thought of about the Constitution has been that it's a live document. It's always available for adjustment and change through a legitimate process and an organized process. But it is a document that keeps us all in mind in terms of how we're treated, what our rights are, and it is a protective document as well.
It is. The constitutional framers used some vague language on purpose. One of the things that's pretty fascinating, though, is that we have the oldest constitution that's been in continual existence now. A lot of people think of the United States as being a young country, but our constitution has remained steady for the reasons that you listed. And our Bill of Rights were 10 amendments. We can talk more about that because they're pretty cool. But 10 amendments added at one time. And since then, we've got 27 amendments total. So really, since 1791, our Constitution has only been altered 17 times, which is really impressive. So it's a living document, like you say, and there's still the Supreme Court interpreting laws, whether they're constitutional, looking at that. But it's a document that's really benefited to preserve our freedoms.
You know, I really do want to get into some of the Bill of Rights laws that talk about those 10, but there's a couple of interesting things also that we want to talk about, things that are very, very pertinent right now, that the Constitution governs and that are important to us as a society. We're in an election period of time. We're about to elect another president. We're about to elect a president, re-elect or elect a new president. Congressmen, legislators, I'm bombarded with commercials all the time. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody's got a pitch. Let's talk about how the Constitution governs and how important it is for voter registration.
Yeah, we get to play an active part in our government. And that's something that I really feel strongly that we shouldn't take lightly. So the elections are coming up on November 3rd, and in South Carolina, you can vote. I know if you're on Facebook Live watching right now, that link will be posted, but it's scgovs, G-O-V-S scvotes.gov. Got that backwards there, had a moment of dyslexia, but scvotes.gov, and you can register to vote there. Steve, you're probably aware that we're in a pandemic. I don't know, it's made a little bit of national attention, but because of that and the crisis that we've been in, now everybody is eligible to vote via absentee ballot if you don't want to go vote in person and risk possible exposure to COVID-19. So there's been a lot in the news about mail-in ballots, but you can do that. You need to register though within 30 days, for 30 days of the election. So October 3rd is the last day you can register. So it's really important to register if you're 18 years or older. And we've got some major, the presidential election going on this year in South Carolina. We have one of the closest Senate races right now between the incumbent Lindsey Graham and his challenger, Jamie Harrison. So it's a year when everybody's voice is going to count. We have a congressional election for the House of Representatives, local elections. 2020 is a big year, and so it's important to vote and express your opinion that people fought for in this American Revolution. And our Constitution starts with "we the people." It's a document for the people of our country, for us. So let's be active participants in that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times we take for granted how important voting is. When I think about voting, particularly from an African-American male perspective and the history of Blacks in voting, I'm particularly dismayed when I see the number of African-Americans who are saying they're not going to vote or they're not going to participate in the democratic process. And I'm one of those individuals that'll ask someone, did you vote? Well, then keep your opinion to yourself. I know that might seem harsh to some, but it is a right that people gave their lives for. And it is a right that gives everyone a voice in the process to be a part of the decision. So if there's something that you don't like, if there's someone that you'd like to see in office, it's important that we take advantage of the right to vote and the protections there are about the right to vote. There are a lot of questions, Cami, coming forward now with the fact that they're going to be most definitely there will be a lot of absentee ballots. There'll be a lot of voting by mail. What protections are there to ensure individuals that there won't be any compromise in their voting?
Yeah, it's something that people can be scared of. You hear about hacking in elections, but under the various laws like the Voting Rights Act, you go to individual states to really make sure that there are secure measures to ensure that people's ballots remain secret and that everybody's measure counts. So it's our government takes this very seriously, and as you know, we've had a rough history in certain states, especially the challenge of registering through previous decades in the 20th century up till the 1960s, African Americans to vote. And so the government takes this very seriously now and ensures that everybody's vote is counted. So even if you're sending this in by mail, that scvotes.gov site has a lot of good information on there about how you do need to have an identification, a state ID. So that's helping, one of the protections there, to make sure that you're an actual valid person and that it's matching up with an identified person and not just sending in random made up ballots. So that's one of the security measures that we have in place as an example.
Sure. Another interesting thing that we talk about, and it's here we are in an election year, and also there's this thing called counting people going around, the census. And I think, and one of the things that I've come to realize is that people really don't understand the breadth and scope of the census and all of the things that the census encompasses. And could you talk a little bit about what the effects are of the census, how important it is to have an accurate or as accurate a possible count of the population, and what that does from a government and social standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. This 2020 is the year of the current census. Every 10 years, we have a census, and that goes back to our wonderful Constitution. In Article 2 of the Constitution, it says that every 10 years, the number of people will be counted. There are a lot of reasons why. One deals with representation. I already mentioned how states with larger populations have more members of the House of Representatives. The way they count that is by the census. Every 10 years, they redo it. So after this coming election or census in the next election, you're going to have adjustments. Some people are going to be leaving states in numbers. A lot of what you call the Rust Belt states like New York are losing people who are moving to other states. South Carolina in the 2010 census, we gained a member in the House of Representatives because more people were coming to South Carolina. So it gets redistributed every 10 years based on those census numbers. So it's really important for our political representation. It's really important for businesses. We were talking beforehand, ever since I moved here, there have been reports of people trying to get Target to come to Greenwood. Businesses are going to look at census numbers, and I'm all for that, by the way. Come on, Target or Target. But businesses look at census numbers in towns, deciding where to open things. Federal funding and its allocation is dependent upon the census. Things like health insurance programs, where hospitals are going. We live in a pretty rural area. You know, we represent, I've mentioned Greenwood, but a lot of our surrounding counties, for any of you who are living in Lawrence like me, or Saluda, Edgefield, Abbeville, looking at rural schools, where they need to go up, how the kids are living there, Head Start programs, food assistance programs, free meals for students. All of that comes down to census numbers. So it's really critical for people to be involved. And it only takes a few minutes to complete your census. You can do it online, you can do it with a phone, you can do it if you've gotten them in the mail. But for 10 years, you're just devoting a few minutes to something that makes a difference for 10 years. So it's really important to be involved in the census there as well.
You know, that's really interesting. So now you can, when you understand some of these principles, you can look and you can see why, you know, a community like a Saluda or areas down like Troy and some of those areas and a McCormick, they don't get the big department stores. They don't get a big Walmart, or they may only have one supermarket, but you know, they may have some of the smaller chain retail outlets like, you know, Dollar General and smaller things move into those communities. But when you have a population like a Greenwood or a Newberry or some of our more established and larger communities, that's why you see Lowe's going in and Home Depot and 2 super Walmarts. I mean, Greenwood has 2 super Walmarts within what, 3 miles of each other?
Yeah, pretty close.
So, and I guess growth in population has a lot to do with that. Wow.
And Greenwood is growing a lot of industries. Piedmont Tech is serving a lot of the industrial population. It's growing, more people moving in here, but not on the census, then we're not going to get some of those permits that we could. Really important to participate in that census.
Yes, so we want to get people out voting. For everyone that's listening, you need to be voting. Please get registered to vote. October 30th, I think, is that
October
latest?
3rd.
October 3rd, I'm sorry. You've got basically about 2.5 weeks to get registered to vote in the upcoming election. If you don't get registered to vote, we don't want to have a conversation about it. You didn't take a part in the process. Then the census is coming. Go out and get your families counted. There are volunteer efforts and opportunities to work with the census, aren't there?
There are, and it's a great student job too, that you can go to census, census.gov, and look at job opportunities there.
Actually, I said volunteer. They'll pay you to be part of the census.
They'll pay you, yeah, work
absolutely.
for the census.
I tell you one other thing we want to talk about is this group of rights that are afforded to all citizens, the Bill of Rights. I remember when I was in school, one of my teachers told me, if you don't know the whole Constitution, you got to at least know the Bill of Rights. Talk to us about the genesis of the Bill of Rights, Cami, as it relates to the Constitution body as a whole, and what those rights, you know, generally are providing us as citizens.
Sure. Goes back to this 1787 time period. When that document was revealed to the public, our current Constitution, you may have heard the terminology Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were people who were for this Constitution. It was creating new federal or central government power, but Anti-Federalists were wary of it. they really feared that it wasn't going to preserve enough rights for the individual. So pretty early on, they decided to amend the Constitution, add 10 amendments, which became known as our Bill of Rights. So the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and you hear these referred to, well, that's my First Amendment right, or that's my Fifth Amendment right, and things like that, that our First Amendment preserves our right to freedom of speech. Now, there are some limits. You hear the famous example of you can't yell fire in a movie theater.
Right.
But freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to petition the government. You can go on the White House petition website and directly have students do this in class sometimes. File a petition with the government to see if you can get enough signatures for it to generate a response there. We have the freedom to do that. Freedom to practice your religion, which other countries don't have. Freedom to assemble. So a lot of freedoms preserved there. Your Fifth Amendment rights that you may hear, that you don't have to self-incriminate. I remember the baseball steroid trials going on a few years ago, and all these baseball juiced guys saying, I plead the Fifth. So you didn't have to self-incriminate. The right to no cruel and unusual punishment. You know, confession, Steve, when I was 5, I stole a York peppermint patty from Winn-Dixie. I think my parents are watching. I don't know if they knew that, but it would be a cruel and unusual punishment if I received a life sentence for that. Right to a speedy trial, that's in our Bill of Rights as well. So many, no illegal search and seizures. You need to have a warrant. No double jeopardy. You can't be tried for an offense a second time if you're let off. We have so many freedoms preserved in that Bill of Rights in those 10 minutes. So like you had been told, you know, if you're not familiar with the other parts, have a good working knowledge of the Constitution, but those Bill of Rights are so critical to the freedoms that we have.
You know, an interesting fact. I mean, here I am learning something, because earlier you stated that in all of the years that the Constitution has been around, it's only been altered 17 times.
Correct.
Are these Bill of Rights considered one alteration?
They are considered one alteration, yes. So in 1791, they're added, and then that's 10 amendments, and then only 17 other times. And there have been, I think, over 11,000 proposed amendments to the Constitution since then, and only 17 have been added. So we've really had a Congress that's in an executive branch that, compared to other countries, have been pretty consistent. And this living document that you spoke of, that the framers developed and crafted, has really continued to serve us very well. It through the years.
How incredible a document it was at its very inception, if it's lasted so far with so little change. I mean, it was tremendously well written. Amelia put through a question. We had a question from one of our watchers regarding a contested presidential election.
Yeah, I saw that.
What's that all about?
Well, the confusing thing that our framers did was, we don't have, the president isn't actually elected by the popular vote. We have this thing called the Electoral College. So that's the number of representatives in your state who serve in the House of Representatives, plus your 2 senators. It's another reason why it's important to get that census in, get more members in your house so that you carry more weight when it comes to the presidential election. But the Electoral College is going to vote on the president. So you take however many representatives that you have in your state, and those 2 Electoral College votes that are added from the Senate. So every state has at least 3 Electoral College votes. I think California, I think they have 50. They have 50 or 52 members in the House. So over 50 Electoral College votes. But if there's a tie in the Electoral College, they're not going to look at the popular vote, but they're going to go to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives would then vote on who the president of the United States would be. So that's another reason why it's important to get your vote in. If there is a tie, if we have a contested election there, then the House of Representatives would be the ones to vote and decide on who the next president would be.
That is tremendous because, and what a great piece of information for people who didn't know about the Electoral College. You know, the popular vote, our current president, and this is not a political statement, our current president did not win the popular vote. So what are we essentially saying that in the true nature of voting, 153, 160 or so people decide the president?
Yeah, it comes down, well, you know, personally,
I asked that question kind of because I know it's an interesting question and to get you to expound upon that point a little bit more.
I like what Maine and Nebraska do. If you look at Maine and Nebraska, they aren't all or none with their electoral college vote. They actually will divide it up. The rest of the states are all or none. So if it, and that's why, like with South Carolina, if we had, now we typically tend to lean more on the Republican side for the presidential election. We've got, I mentioned the really tight race right now between Republican Lindsey Graham and Democratic nominee, Democratic challenger Jamie Harrison, and the Senate race, the one that people are really keeping an eye on up in Washington. But in some of these, you hear these battleground states like Wisconsin, that can be really close. Who are they going to go for? All those electoral votes are going to go to one candidate or the other. So you say, well, there are millions of voting. But when it comes down to these individual states, then it's really important to get your vote in, because those electoral college votes are going to go all or none.
Right.
So so your voice, it just shows how much that counts in those state elections, especially in elections where with states, those battleground states, purple, you hear them called sometimes, because Democratic states are known as the blue ones, Republican the red. So those purple states that can flip and go either way. It's really important for people to get out there and vote.
I tell you what, you know, elections, voting, these are all things that would be a tremendously interesting study for anyone who really wanted to take an in-depth look at what the processes are. I've done that and started reading and doing more research, even just in the last few years, and have been blown away by what I thought was happening as opposed to what was really happening in terms of voting, in terms of legislation and rulings and things of that nature. You know, we find ourselves at a time where our country is at odds in a lot of ways, but we are not a lawless country. We do have a governing document that provides equal protection under the law for everyone.
It does. And so we're really a blessed people in terms of how that does protect our rights. And obviously it's been through challenges. You know, the word slavery doesn't appear until 1865 in the 13th Amendment. We have the notorious 3/5 clause of where the constitutional framers counted slaves as 3/5 of the population. So it's a document that has changed and is imperfect in a lot of ways, but really works to preserve the rights of us to be able to vote, to be able to have individual freedoms. And it served us very well in the United States.
Well, I tell you, Cami, I mean, we could go on and talk forever because this is an extremely interesting, and I really like history. I read a lot of history. You know, I read a lot of history, particularly pertaining to African-American history, because, you know, I have this personal mission to continue to lift up young Black males and females to make sure that they understand that they have a legitimate part in the democratic process, that everything's not written against them. There are to remove barriers in their minds and their hearts about, you know, what they can and can't accomplish. I mean, we have the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all these laws that govern our country and give them all equal opportunities to be successful. We have outlying problems within our communities, but here is one of the most impressive bodies of law ever written, and it's equally effective for everyone. Any final thoughts you'd like to have? I mean, I know you could go on, and I've got a ton of questions, but we have a time limit. But anything that I didn't ask that you want to cover or to talk about? You know, this is so great. We'll take a few minutes.
Yeah, just trivia is always fun. Youngest signer of the Constitution was 26. The oldest one is a name most people would be familiar with, and that was Benjamin Franklin. He was 81 years old, and he was in some pain when he signed it. But George Washington was the president of the Constitutional Convention,
right,
and had a half sun, S-U-N, on his chair. And Benjamin Franklin said that he was glad that the sun was rising and not setting. He knew it. He had faith in the document when they signed it there in Philadelphia.
Excellent. Well, Cami, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's been tremendously informative and entertaining as well. We look forward to speaking with you again sometime in the future. And
thanks, Steve B.
Stevie B at PTC. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was really fun.
Great. And ladies and gentlemen, that's another issue. There's another episode of PTC Live with Stevie B at PTC. Thanking my dear friend, Cami Sargeant now. And we'll see you next week, or we'll see you the week after for another exciting interview and more fantastic information about Piedmont Technical College, our instructors, and issues that are affecting our community. Stevie B at PTC. We'll see you next time.